Welcome to Red Carpet Healthcare Solutions, hosted by Dr. Ryan Molli and Travis Buzzell. Join us on this journey as we educate the patient population, inform today's medical providers, and inspire tomorrow's medical leaders through education and in-depth discussions. We can all discover today's best healthcare solutions. Now, sit back and enjoy Red Carpet Healthcare Solutions Private Practice Podcasters.
So I have lots of different ideas, and one is I feel like every doctor, like we should have like a buddy system like they do in the Army. And, like every doctor should just have somebody that checks on them. And I participate in a women's fellowship group at my church. So through the pandemic, we just right away went to Zoom, but we never missed a beat. So when you have people so all this stuff that happened, it was like constant with me. Like there was something new all the time for like the past 5 years. Cause I haven't even told you all of it. Cause it's like the tamoxifen they put me on to reduce recurrence of the breast cancers, damage in my uterus. And a few months ago, I had a total hysterectomy. So like it doesn't end. But to have people that are always there, because if you don't talk to people very often, then your conversations are going to be more superficial because you don't have that connection or that time. But if you have regular times to check in, and sometimes it might be, I don't know, my wife got a new haircut, right? Or something like that, right? It could be little things, but then that makes time and space for the big things. So I'll stop talking right now so you guys can say more, but that's one idea I have is somehow it's like creating like a buddy system. So like every doctor has a buddy that they can just check in regularly about the mundane stuff. So then when the bigger things come up, you've already formed that relationship.
I mean, I think through your YouTube channel and, our podcast and all the other podcasts out there, specifically, healthcare related. I mean, I feel like that's a part of the community, right? And I feel like LinkedIn has really brought a lot of people together. Not just, I guess, self-proclaimed, not like very busy on the LinkedIn. It's just never sort of been my thing, but I just kind of lurk in the shadows, if you will, and just read some of the content and see some of the conversations from posts that are happening. And it really is amazing. And, I just hear one thing, Kim, from you that I think is going to be so important in the mission and the conversation is like consistency. You just seem to have been very, very consistent with your activity and your, just action just seems to have been very consistent since you've kind of started, in this space and down this pathway and I've intersected with so many different people. And I just like, look where it's taken you, right? I mean, to, being involved in this book and 100, episodes on YouTube and all the different podcasts and all the different articles. I'm sure as a pediatric physical therapist, a decade ago, that probably is not something that you ever envisioned yourself doing. And, I'll be honest with you. If someone would have told me that me and my buddy over here were going to be doing a podcast in his, I wish you could see this thing. It's in our kind of lair. His lair that I get to come and hang out in. I would have probably told you that was never going to be something that I would do, but I'm so glad that it has, because it's brought us together. It's brought us to people like you, and I just feel like of all the conversations that we've had around this topic, this is the conversation, at least for me, that I feel the best about, because I feel like we're talking about things, call to action, stuff that people can do. I love your idea about the buddy system. I just kind of thought like big brother, big sister, sort of like a similar, maybe even like some type of platform or portal like that, physicians can go in and be a part of and, like communicate, or I don't know, like somehow like connect. I don't.
Well, there are some things. So there's Physicians Anonymous, and that's, like a free and confidential. They have Zooms, and you don't have to show your face. You don't have to say your real name. And that's been a real help for some doctors. And there are like some doctors are creating like apps and different things that you can check on. And I just recently recorded an episode with Dr. Stephen Palanchuk. He's in Canada, and he started a monthly, he's a critical care doctor, and one day a month, they do this 3 times during the day to catch the 3 shifts of nurses. So they'll have like an hour, kind of like a powwow, and it's doctors and nurses, just like, how are you doing? What's going on? So again, it's exactly to your point, it's consistency. So when they're regularly talking, they get to see each other as people. They get to talk about the little things. My kid won the soccer game, right? And then, but when you're have built that relationship, then that makes room for the big thing. So it's all about connection and a sense of community, and that is what we formed on LinkedIn. So yeah, to your point, that's something else that's so there are things there. So one thing I try to do too is connect doctors with each other. Like when I talk to a doctor, I seem to know who they'd like to be connected to, so then that helps them, and they kind of say that they're Kim approved. Like if I give somebody a shout out and then they feel comfortable connecting, and then we kind of like make this LinkedIn family that keeps getting bigger. So next fall, I'm going to, not 2025, but 2026. I have a milestone birthday, and I want to celebrate doctors that are keeping me alive. And so I'm having a epic physician retreat. So it's going to be about an hour from here. And I'm going to start with the registrations pretty soon because I rented out the whole property. So it'll only be doctors. And then for them to come together. So it's like the doctors that have gotten to know each other on LinkedIn, or they've been together on my YouTube channel. Cause now I generally pair people up. It makes for a rich conversation. And then sometimes they continue the relationship.
Yeah. I think one of the other big things is, again, it's awareness, but physicians just need to realize that this is extremely common. Burnout is extremely common. And it's not, we need to get past this whole stigma of mental health. And unfortunately, during our training, I can speak mainly just from an orthopedic surgery training standpoint, but it's very much like the military in that we sublimate. We're trained to become very robotic. This is the problem. This is the solution. And there's no time for quote unquote weakness. There's no time for quote unquote bad days. There's no time for feelings to be shared. We're here to solve problems. We're here to fix people. And we're not supposed to need fixed, right? We're supposed to rise above. And, it allowed us to get through that rigorous training and allowed us to, I think oftentimes we have to be able to disconnect to be able to get through these challenging things. Like say you have a patient that passes away, right? We're then expected to go in the very next room and deal with the next patient almost like that didn't happen, right? So that's that training. It's almost a bit of brainwashing, right. But I think we need to start unbrainwashing ourselves and start really having conversations in our training, right? In our residencies, in our fellowships, where they say, hey, it's not uncommon to get burned out in your career. It's not uncommon to suffer from compassion fatigue. It's not uncommon to feel like you're not enough and that you're not doing a good enough job. It's not uncommon to feel like, you know what I'm saying? Because we have been trained in such a, I think, intentional way to kind of rise above and just be like machines, so to speak. And maybe there's some softer subspecialties where they do have those conversations more, whether it's psychology or maybe primary care, things like that. But I can tell you it's not orthopedic surgery. And, the other daunting statistic is that 28.2% of surgeon suicides are orthopedic surgeons. So we're very common ones to fall, victim to this. And I think until we start just opening up, like I've just kind of taken my stand within the past couple years since on this podcast we've been talking about it, but on LinkedIn I've become very, very vocal over the past several months about this, because it's when it hits so close to home, and we had a general surgeon that just committed suicide, within the past month, and I had a very close orthopedic surgeon whose son, who was 15, committed suicide a couple years ago. I mean, it's devastating, and you think about the ripple effect of that, right? First and foremost, the surgeon or the people's families, like the wife, the husband, the kids.
Right.
Then you think about the community and the patients, and then colleagues, and it's just a systematic ripple effect. And you lose one physician who's taking care of hundreds, maybe thousands of patients. That's a huge ripple.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And what I've learned also is when we're talking about like proper language to use around this, is what I've been told is like in that moment, the person, when they decide that they're not any more able to control their actions than like someone that has a heart attack. So if you talk about someone that died, you say they died from a heart attack. So I recently learned like that the terminology that it's helpful if you say like someone died from suicide, because it's not like they committed a crime. Like some religions would say that it's a crime, but it's almost like that in that moment in their own brain that they couldn't control it any more than someone who had a heart attack. So when I talk about it, I try to say like, someone that died from suicide. But speaking to what you said before, and it absolutely, like the culture of medicine has to change, and the culture in medicine and medical training has to change, because you are always taught to put the patient's need before yourself, and that's not true. Like it's not trite about putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. You have to take care of yourself and resource yourself, and so that is backwards in training, right? When you go 12 hours without food or going to the bathroom or sleeping, and even in the military, because you mentioned that before, like they make sure that they get enough sleep, because they know, right, that to do your best you need enough sleep. So those things, and then like you said, imposter syndrome, all of those things, like that has to start in medical training, to talk to like med students and residents about these things. And precisely what you said, like if you're running a code, you need to compartmentalize and not let your emotions take over. But then if you do that like all the time and never decompress and never feel your emotions and do too much compartment, it's going to catch up with you sometime or another. So that you do need to, I have this, if you guys seen the feelings wheel, there's like so many I can pull it out when one of you starts talking. I'll pull it out to show you. There's all these things that you can feel. Like Dr. Michael Hirsch, when he showed it to me, he said something about, I used to think I could only feel like happy, sad, and mad. Like I had like 3 or 4 feelings, but you can feel all of these things, and you need to, and it's normal and it's human. And when you're taught almost not to have too much empathy, like you're not supposed to get too emotionally involved with the patient, but those are human feelings and it's okay. And that's what, makes that connection. Because like you said, you're not robots. So it's almost like you're trained the opposite, because you can have compassion without letting it overtake you. But that is how you feel human, because you are human.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've identified the problem. I think that we just need to kind of gear the conversations moving forward. And quite honestly, I like sort of what you're talking about, like retreats. And I think that for, particularly the LinkedIn community, and, obviously there's, different groups of physicians and their specialties, but, I think that that's a really good idea to sort of have like these retreats. And like you said, you sort of have this dialogue, and then there's like 7-8 topics that are big, and that's okay. And then we're going to dissect those a little bit, right? I really love that format, because I feel like that's where solutions kind of start brainstorming, being creative. Potentially, you kind of start to lead there, because I just have this picture in my head of like what it was to like have a doctor back in the day, and you walked in and the receptionist knew who you were, and,
Right.
He came out himself and got you and brought you back, and, he knew your mom, he knew your dad, and, he was talking to you, and, and it just sort of felt like you spent like an hour with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
could you imagine what would happen now? I mean, there would be hospital administrators parachuting from helicopters coming to beat physicians up for spending an hour with a patient. But it's just like, I as a, I'm 37 years old. I remember my physician then, and I remember when he transitioned to, being employed by the health system here where we live. And I just remember it was a different office. So obviously that was the feel, but I just remember as a kid, it was just so different. Like I just remember spending time there. I remember like, it just seemed like everyone kind of knew you and that you just sort of had that rapport with them. And like, now, and he just retired last year, and I'm getting ready I'll meet my new provider. I don't know, sometime at the end of this month, but it's just, I know that it's probably not going to be like that. And it's like trying to figure out a way to get back there, both I think for patients and the patient experience, which I mean is near and dear to both of us and that mission, but for, physicians and, the day-to-day grind.
That's a great point, Trav. I mean, we talk about the patient experience all the time.
Yeah.
What about the physician experience?
100%. 100%.
What about the physician experience? Like, because if I am really loving and enjoying my job and feeling fulfilled, I'm going to be that much better to show up for my patients and give them a better experience, right?
That's it.
It's not sustainable how it currently is. And if it's just all this one-sided, as Kim pointed out, like putting the oxygen mask on the patients first, not thinking about our own health and wellness and our experience of it, it's never going to change.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And to go back to this feelings wheel, because it really is, if you look up The Feeling Wheel by Gloria Wilcox, like this actually really is important. And I was on the ambulance corps when I was in high school, and then I became a physical therapist. So for some of this, like when I talked to, Michael, I told him at first, I'm like, now I cry at the drop of a hat. In my whole life, I said I was never an emotional person. And he was like, well, what if you were? And I think it was even for myself. I think I was trained to compartmentalize, right? Like since I was 16 years old, my very first call was a CPR call. And then we had to get back on the ambulance and try to save more people, right? And so I started compartmentalizing from the time I was a teenager. So sometimes like he'll even ask me, well, how did such and such make you feel? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't want to talk about my feelings. So I literally take this out and think about, how did I really feel? And for doctors, like this can really help you, like, oh my gosh, like I can feel all of these things. So I don't, want to minimize that. And I also think, speaking to what you're saying, is that we have to raise patient awareness. Because too, even if there has to be some kind of legislative changes, if only the doctors go to the voting booths, we're in trouble, right? So we have to, patients really do need to understand, because lots of times if I'll share a little story here and there with, people in my life, they have no idea what's going on behind closed doors. And that's why I'm so happy and proud of our book, because that's going to, raise awareness too, to some of the things that are going on, behind closed doors. And I feel like there's different things we can do, whether it's like a national march of patients and doctors, because one doctor had told me that's how social changes really happen. If you think of like the women's right to vote or civil rights, it took, like national marches and a big civil movement. So maybe that's what we need. Like, do we need to start planning, something like that? Or I've been considering just very recently forming like a international Stand Up for Doctors coalition, right? To have like doctors and patients on this. So we're all raising awareness, because I do want to, we're all talking about it, but like, what can we actually do? And I love the story that I shared with you about the Impact for Doctors Day. So again, it might not have reached you, Ryan, quite right, because you didn't. But some doctors did get.
Send some of those cards over.
Like, how can we? Excuse me. Like, really expand the impact for that next year. Like, I feel like what we did shows an example is we have to wait for legislative changes. You can just take some people that want to do something and you can just go do it.
Yeah, I mean, these are all great ideas. And again, the one very positive thing I will take out of all of this, and what I've noticed over the past several months, is when I personally have started speaking up about physician wellness and in particular physician suicide, the most popular post I've ever put on LinkedIn was the one about physician suicide. I mean, it reached, I mean, the amount of comments on there, it was hard to keep up with it. I try to respond to every single or reply to every single comment. And it was like every 2 minutes I'm having to put another one on there. But I felt so overwhelmed with like gratitude for people not ignoring that post. Right. And it's not about like getting likes or getting but these people were putting paragraphs in there about how, you know, this is impacting people, physicians, families all around the country. And just to be speaking about it, and because it wasn't easy for me to bring it up, right? Because no one wants to talk about that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, Debbie Downer, Dr. Molli here is bringing up physician suicide again. It's like, well, you know, somebody has to. And if it has to be me, and if I have to have these conversations and shed some light on it, so be it, right? I've got broad shoulders. I can handle that. And the positive thing though is like all the overwhelming support. And since then, I've started to see more and more content talking about physician burnout, talking about physician suicide, talking about physician health and wellness. So I do believe that pendulum is going to start shifting and swinging because of the great things you're doing, Kim, the great things that other organizations out there are doing to just bring awareness to this.
Right. And speaking to language, so a couple interesting things. So I know some doctors don't like the word provider, and they'll even wear a name tag that says hashtag not a provider. So when I speak, I either say like, if I'm trying to include more people than doctors, I'll say like clinician or healthcare worker, because there's no reason to turn people off for no reason. So that's one thing that I try to be aware of. And then also burnout and resilience. So some doctors don't like it if people are talking about, physician resilience, because they're like, we're already the most resilient people, some of the most resilient people on the planet. But what you can actually speak to it about is that resilience means going through a challenging time and coming out stronger. So yes, the system needs to change, and they shouldn't be telling doctors to just go do yoga and here's a pizza party. But there are things that individual physicians can do to resource themselves, again, to make sure you're taking care of your own basic needs, to make sure that you have connections. So I think it's important that we talk about that when we're talking about, resilience, so they don't just throw the word out. And then also burnout. Some of them hate the word burnout because what they think it really is moral injury. And there's both, and you can have either or both. So we don't want to get hung up on the word, burnout, because like many careers, so many people could be burnt out in their job. You could have an excessive workload, a toxic work environment. But then the moral injury component is when you're prevented from doing the things, like say you wanted to do surgery on a patient and it's denied, and then they're in pain and you really wanted to help them and you're prevented from doing so, or they really need surgery, but they're making you send them to 3 months of physical therapy, right? So there's some kind of things there that are more like the moral injury. So that's one thing I just wanted to raise awareness here, is for us not to get too caught up on, the language. I don't know if you have anything.
No, I think those are great points for sure.
And one more thing I'd like to add is one other thing that we don't have to wait, because yes, things have to change in the system, but if we could all start being kind to each other, that's something else that we don't need to wait for the system to change. And basically this year I've had some physicians talking about physician trauma and trauma-informed coaching. And basically we're all walking around interacting with each other's trauma. So, like healthcare and trauma can be anything. Doctors have experienced child abuse or trauma in their medical training. They witness suffering and death on a daily basis. So doctors have experienced so much trauma. And other people have too, right? Like, so healthcare leaders, sometimes they're not sensitive to the physicians because they're walking around, with their own trauma. And then sometimes doctors have had their own trauma, and sometimes they become insensitive to their patients, right? And then sometimes patients aren't sensitive to their doctors because they're there because they're sick. So if everyone could just be like truly like just kind and respect each other, then that imagine like things could be better like right now.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. I was like, why can't, we are inherently very competitive people, physicians. And again, I'm going to go to the orthopedic surgery. We're like the bell curve of really super competitive. But I just feel like instead of tearing each other down, which is very easy to do, right? Oh, I don't agree with how you're doing this or how you're doing that, or maybe even some of the conversations that we're having, these tough conversations. But just taking a step back to just be like, all right, you don't know where this person's coming from. When I posted that thing about physician suicide and, the CMO of a hospital came after me. Yeah. And it's like, he had his own viewpoint and perspective, but I also had my own viewpoint and perspective. And he doesn't know if I have anybody close to me that has died from suicide. Right. And I have had. So, right. I think it's just one of those times to just, as you mentioned, just to be more kind, right? Like if I'm talking to my children right now, it's like, be kind to one another. Right. The world is hard enough as it is, right? There's enough problems in the world as it is. Like, let's just be kind to one another. Let's support one another. And if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Dude, you took the words literally right out of my mouth, because I was going to say, before my 5-year-old, every morning that I'm lucky enough to see him off to school, it's be kind. If you don't have anything nice to say, keep it to yourself. Like, seriously.
Hold and roll.
Yeah, it's like 5-year-old. It's like, come on, guys, we're adults here. I mean, I get it. But again, I mean, I just think from this conversation, Kim, you just brought up so many different things for me, like just like the trauma that I think, these physicians and these doctors carry around, maybe from like just their childhood, their training, these other things. But like, I mean, I have to be honest with you. I mean, I'm not a person that has historically struggled with anxiety or anything like that. I just kind of was like, hey, yeah, ready to rock, Then I started to have kids and got married, and you have responsibility, and now you have someone you're responsible for, and you worry about them when they're not with you. And then, I mean, for a short term there, it turned me into a basket case. I mean, I got like a NATO drone following my kid around, just like, and it's like, but you don't know. And I can't imagine, what doctors and physicians, and I have an idea, but I'll never say that I understand it, because it's not something that I live. My life and my world is very parallel to that. Okay. And it's not it. It's next to it, but it ain't it. Okay. And, just the trauma that I think can be created from the job itself. Inherently, I think being a doctor and being a surgeon and being a physician creates trauma on a daily basis, whether it's, from, just bad outcomes, because just things happen out of your control, whether it's, things that are fueled by, patient compliance and things that are out of your control. These are still things that happen though, right? And still things that, now scenarios that, these physicians or doctors are then having to deal with, and just tragedies every day, right? I mean, you got to remember when tragedies happen every day, right? Mass school shootings, the incident in New Orleans. I mean, terrorist attack. You think about all these horrible, just very, just dark things that happen. Where do all these people go, right? After the tragedy, where do they go? They go to the hospital, right? They go to seek care, from the physician, from the doctor, from the surgeon. And it's just like, these are the people that in your worst moment that, people run to, and, that person has to absorb that every single day, right? And some days are better than others, but, that's a really good point. I never thought of, that trauma accumulation just over the years of the job, right? I mean, it wears on you. I'm sure same thing, in the military, that was sort of a parallel that we sort of grabbed, but it's like, maybe, the first, couple trainings aren't too bad. And then, you get in the thick of it and, you experience some, very challenging, horrible things. And it's like, sometimes you just don't just sweep that under the rug. I mean, think historically we've seen that happen, and it doesn't end well. So I appreciate that that idea. That's
I think one other thing that brings up for me is, I thank my wife all the time for, just her support. But about 5 years ago was when she really kind of convinced me to seek professional counseling from a life coach. And prior to that, she was like, "Who do you talk to?" I'm like, "What do you mean who would I talk to? I talk to myself. And I talk to God. I don't need anybody else, right? I can fix this. I got this." And for the past 5 years, at least once every 2 weeks, if not once every week, I speak for 50 minutes with, a professional life coach that she's a trained therapist, but it's a lot of work talk, but it's a lot of personal stuff too. Helps to keep me grounded, helps to keep me focused, helps to keep me accountable. And, she'll give me homework assignments, and I don't like homework, but they're not like do a research paper. It's like, it's things that are important for me. Like her one homework thing for me was like, "Ryan, you keep talking about how you're neglecting your own health, your own wellness." And so she's like, "I need you to make an appointment, before our next session, for you to like seek this wellness thing that I've been wanting to do for over a year now." So I just urge physicians to, again, not see weakness in having to talk to somebody or having a life coach, because just for me personally, she's been tremendously helpful, and just to keep my focus and to keep, emotions in check.
Right. And truly seeking help is a strength. It's not a sign of weakness. And my
Amen.
friend Pat Dunstan, who was a nurse and then became a lawyer and had to leave because she developed Parkinson's, she said doctors are expected to be superhuman and not complain because of their salaries. A lot of people don't have empathy for them because they think a doctor's life would be the ultimate. And meanwhile, right, like that, and but it was so true. And a lot of it, I think, is like, when speaking with doctors too, is that a lot of them are self-selected, to be perfectionists, to have all these, like different tendencies. And doctors, you are human too, and you're no less likely to have anxiety, depression, because you come with all those other things too. And not only, and this is why the work of the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation is so important. They're trying to remove the intrusive questions on all the licensing. So whether Travis knows, so for me, for my physical therapy license, on the back, I just have to check off, like, was I convicted of a felony, within the last year, or did I complete my continuing ed credits? But for doctors, and I think pharmacists and nurses, you have to check off if you've sought help for mental health counseling. Now, Dr. Joe Sherman, on one of my episodes, I loved it. He said the next question should be, and if not, why not? Because, like, you need help, right? And I think that's a perfect response. But that's what happened with Dr. Lorna Breen. She was, working in the ER during the pandemic, like 12 or more hour shifts. And then she got COVID. She took the 10 days off that was required. She went back still sick, doing more than 12-hour shifts. And she was just not, ready to go back. People were dying in the waiting room, dying in the hallways. And one morning she woke up in pretty much a catatonic state, called her sister. They got her down to Virginia. She got inpatient treatment. But a few days after she was released, she took her own life because she was concerned about filling out those questions, or that would affect her license. And I think she didn't realize, I do believe that New York had removed the intrusive questions. But so unfortunately, that's not the case in the whole country. So some of Dr. fears aren't totally unfounded, and it just shouldn't be that way. And so not only are they're the real sometimes fears, but even now, a lot of the states now, they have removed the questions, there's that internal shame. Like they feel like, oh, I'm a doctor, I'm so smart, I should be able to fix this myself. Right. But no, like, as because you've experienced coaching, like what Michael says is you can't read the label from inside the jar.
That's great.
I like that.
Never heard that, but I like that a lot. Well, Kim, I just want to thank you for taking the time, again, for being flexible. Sure. We had to rearrange this a couple times, but this has been awesome. Can't wait to read your book. Can't wait to see some of your articles on Kevin MD and check out some of the other
No,
things that are going on there.
You're great. I mean, honestly, this was one of my favorite conversations. I really appreciate it. And so I know that like you've got a lot of stuff going on. So Jay, does all the editing and, takes care of a lot of that stuff for us here on the podcast. So right here, we'll have him put some links to Medicine Forward, a link to the book release. It sounds like in the next few days that's going to drop. And then to the episodes on YouTube for the Stand Up for Doctors. We'll have him sort of just create a link there to all the things that you're involved with. So if you could just get him that information, we'll want to make that readily available so that all the, the viewers and everyone who participates and, hopefully sees this, through subscribing, liking, giving feedback. I think there are a number of themes in this podcast today that I think could probably be their own podcast with just some of the themes that we talked about tonight. So I greatly appreciate it.
For sure. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I could send you the link. I started a Substack newsletter. And how that happened is I started sending my own doctors a monthly update of what I was trying to do. Like I wanted them to know, like I'm trying to help you. So as I got involved with some things on LinkedIn, I would just let them know. And then it ended up turning into, Eva Minkoff. She recommended to me, she was on Medicine Forward team, that I start a Substack newsletter. So now that's like a monthly update. And then when so May 3rd, we had a gathering of LinkedIn friends. I organized it at a rooftop bar in Manhattan. And some people came from like Connecticut, Westchester, Long Island, New Jersey, and even Philadelphia. And that's that in-person, like those connections. So then when I put that stuff like in the Substack newsletter, like, that just even fosters more connection, when people see that, and it just, makes them feel good.
Awesome
stuff. So again, I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in. As Travis mentioned, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave comments, leave suggestions, leave guests that you may want to see on the show. But Kim, thank you again. Have an incredible evening. And I look forward to meeting you in person at some point.
That'll happen. And I want to thank you for the opportunity and for all that you do for patients, from a very grateful patient.
You are very welcome. And thank you for the acknowledgement. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks.
Have a great day, guys.
Thanks.
As a disclaimer, this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professional from any such conditions.